Chapter 5. Keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. Be not rash with thy mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven, and thou upon the earth. Therefore let thy words be few. For a dream cometh through a multitude of business, and a fool's voice is known by multitude of words. When thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better is it that thou shouldst not vow, than that thou shouldst vow and not pay. Suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin. Neither say thou before the angel that it was an error. Wherefore should God be angry at thy voice, and destroy the work of thine hands? For in the multitude of dreams and many words there are also diverse vanities. But fear thou God. If thou seest the oppression of the poor, and violent perverting of judgment, and justice in a province, marvel not at the matter. For he that is higher than the highest regardeth, and there be higher than they. Moreover, the profit of the earth is for all. The king himself is served by the field. He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with an increase. This is also vanity. When goods increase, they are increased that eat them. And what good is there to the owners thereof, saving the beholding of them with their eyes? The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep. There is a sore evil which I have seen under the sun, namely riches kept for the owners thereof to their hurt. But those riches perish by evil travail, and he begetteth a son, and there is nothing in his hand. As he came forth of his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a sore evil, that in all points as he came, so shall he go. And what profit hath he that hath labored for the wind? All his days also he eateth in darkness, and he hath much sorrow and wrath in his sickness. Behold, that which I have seen, it is good and comely for one to eat and drink, and to enjoy the good of all his labor that he taketh under the sun all the days of his life, which God giveth him, for it is his portion. Every man also to whom God hath given riches and wealth, and hath given him power to eat thereof, and to take his portion, and to rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. For he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answereth him in the joy of his heart. The very first part of chapter 5 is actually Proverbs in Ecclesiastes. It's not unlikely unknown, because Solomon, of course, wrote most of the Proverbs. But here is just good advice. And it says, in verse 2, for instance, be not rash with thy mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God. In other words, don't make promises. For God is in heaven, thou on earth, therefore let thy words be few. And then he basically goes in verse 4, and basically says, when thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay. In other words, you can promise something to God, pay it right away. For God has no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better it is that thou shouldst not vow than that thou shouldst vow and not pay, in verse 5. Very, very good advice. And that applies to anybody and anything. And it says in verse 8, if thou seest oppression of the poor, and violent perverting of judgment. In other words, people taking advantage of people in a province, marvel not. For he that is higher than the highest, in other words, those people who are the ones who are higher than the people doing the perverting, they will know what's happening, and there will be higher than them. It'll usually be the king. And they will find out, and they will look after it. And moreover, the profit of the earth is in all. The king himself is served by the field, which basically means that even though there is a field and it doesn't look like it, the king gets some good out of that field. He'll get taxes, he'll get some food, he'll get some grain, he'll get some meat, whatever out of that field. The king will be there, and he will want to know what's happening to it. If things go down, don't get as much, he'll want to know. Now, interesting thing here, I got to remember this is still in these negative things he's talking about. When goods increased, the people are increased that eat those things. When you grow more food, you have a tendency to have more people to eat that more food. And so he said, so, you know, what good is there to the owners thereof, saving the beholding of them with their eyes? In other words, looking at the more food with your eyes and looking at all the people with your eyes. But there just is so much that's negative here, or just seems to be striving to say, there's just no getting ahead. There's just no getting ahead. Every time it looks like you're going to get something, it turns out you don't. But verse 14, but those riches perish by evil travail, and he begetteth a son, and there is nothing in his hand. Basically, the evil work that people do, when you beget a son, sometimes there's nothing in your hand to give to the son. As he came forth out of his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came. In other words, you brought nothing into the world, you can take nothing out. Verse 17, all his days also he eateth in darkness, and he hath much sorrow and wrath in his sickness. And sometimes that's the way it is with people who are older. They have much wrath, and there's much upset in their sickness. And how do you deal with this? These again are the questions that Solomon is bringing up. How do you handle all of these challenges? Every man also, verse 19, also to whom God hath given riches and wealth, and hath given him power to eat thereof. In other words, he can use his riches and wealth for whatever it is he wants, and to take his portion, and to rejoice his labor. This is the gift of God. For he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answer him in the joy of his heart. He isn't going to remember much of what he does, because he's going to have joy, but he probably won't remember what he had to work at or what to do, because he didn't actually have to do it. He had wealth, so he didn't have to work, because he was able to buy whatever he wanted.